a little.
That was part of the test.
It's John Martin.
Well, he's not here yet. You can switch, you know, and let him have the polls there.
I'm good. As long as I don't pull nothing down.
Okay. 12:30, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. With us today are Ryan Clark and Tom Jeeves, who are candidates for the Constable for North Las Vegas Township. We do have a few ground rules I just wanted to share with you before we get started. We'll be following a strict schedule, and we'll be adhering to it without exception. This is an interview, not a debate, so there'll be no redirected questions. Candidates are allowed 1.5 minutes for an introduction, so you'll do a self-introduction. And then panelists are given 30 seconds to pose the questions, and candidates will have 1 minute to respond. With that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I think Mr. Clark, if you'd go ahead and get started first and give your 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Clark. I'm a candidate for the North Las Vegas Constable's office. First off, I'm an Air Force veteran from the past. Moved to Nevada about 6.5 years ago. Started off my law enforcement career with the City of North Las Vegas Police Department. I'm a graduate of Southern Nevada Regional Police Academy. It's at Community College of Southern Nevada. After that, I currently work for the Las Vegas Constable's office. I'm a lieutenant with them. I've been there for nearly 5 years now. I've done a little bit from the civil side to a little bit of criminal stuff to warrants to seizures. We do a lot of special type seizures with businesses and stuff like that. I have 2 children. Love my kids to death. I'm a big father, involved in their life quite a bit. That's pretty much about it.
Thank you. Mr. Jeeves?
Hi, my name is Thomas Jeeves. Everybody knows me as Tom.
Could you move closer to the microphone?
Everybody knows me as Tom. I moved here in 1991 after graduating from Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. I started, after I graduated, I worked for a couple hotels and hotel security, the Gold Coast, MGM, and Stratosphere, before I got the job at the North Las Vegas Constable's office in 1995 or 94 by Lou Tabbitt. He's the previous constable. So I've been working here in November, it'll be 18 years. I was the deputy. I've been the chief deputy of the North Las Vegas Constable's office for the last 16 years under current constable Herb Brown. Everything that we've done and that I know I've learned from him over the past 16 years. I'm Nevada Post certified. I got that certification in 1996. I've served over 75,000 garnishments, evictions, small claims, summonses, any civil papers that the constable's office job is to do, I've done in my career. I'm running for constable. My boss is retiring, so I want to keep the standard that the office has been running for the last 17 years under him, and I want to keep that high quality continuing on with the office and the citizens of North Las Vegas. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jeeves. Mr. Berjonas, would you ask the first question?
Sure, I asked the previous candidates about their oath to the Constitution. This time I'll give you guys an example. It all falls a little bit outside of your purview, but you're still law enforcement. So President Obama says, I'm going to do an executive order, we're going to take away everyone's guns. What do you guys do?
For our job, just for our job, I wouldn't do the job if I couldn't carry a firearm. I've had all the training necessary to carry a firearm, but there are times in our jobs that if we didn't have those,
Talk about from citizens, I'm sorry.
Oh, citizens. Oh.
Yeah, executive order to disarm all Nevadans.
I would disagree with that. As long as they're law-abiding citizens and they own their guns legally with proper background checks and everything that the police or the government says is necessary, then they should be allowed to have guns.
Well, that's a good question. I think the way you have to look at that is if it's an order directly from the president.
It is.
If it's from the president, I took the oath to uphold all the laws, state, local, and federally. So Obviously, the constable's office doesn't get involved in that much. Sometimes you have to take firearms from people and, officer safety type issues. But I think you would have to also see how the other local law enforcement, like, the sheriff's office, what the stance are, because I know there's some issues like that within Colorado. There's a big one up there, kind of very similar. So I don't think I could answer that completely correctly right now. There would be more to that I would want to see and kind of see what's going on. But to answer your question, I would say I would follow it because it's a federal ordinance.
We have this thing called the Constitution. You guys take an oath to this. The Second Amendment ensures that all citizens are able to hold firearms as long as they don't break any laws. Please uphold the Constitution at all costs. It's above and beyond any presidential office or administration.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tony?
My question is for Ryan. Thank you both for being here today. Tony Baca. Ryan, how do you plan on improving the constable's office specifically? There might be a couple areas that you see are much needed improvement. And with your experience, how do you plan on improving at least a couple areas?
Okay, yeah, great question. There's numerous areas. Everyone's aware of the problems that's going on in North Las Vegas, the financial issues. What I want to do as the constable's office, it's a very unique office. Don't know how many people are familiar with what the constables do, number one. The big thing, and I know you've heard from some of the other ones, it's a self-funded office, okay? It's very important, so you're bringing in money for the services that you go out and perform. However, there's other programs that you can do as a law enforcement officer directly to help the city of North Las Vegas. I want to partner with the police department. I want to partner with other agencies out there. Now, obviously, this is a slow process because this office isn't, 100 officers to where you can go out and go take over the city. That's not my goal. My goal is to take over non-essential police work at no cost to the taxpayers. Some of these laws are written into statute as we speak, so you don't have to get legislators to change any laws. The problem is with the constable's office, going back to that, you could do a lot of programs. The problem is the funding comes in and the constable compensates himself after all expenses. So that's a very fine line when you have to say, am I going to give back to the community or am I going to take out of my pocket? So it's a very unique office. A lot of people refer to it as a hybrid type office, but I think, number one, it's an honor and a privilege to be elected to a public office. So I feel you have to give back to the community of the people that voted you in. So anything you can do, whether it takes out of your own pocket or not, you have to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to ask that same question to
No.
Okay. Rowena?
Good afternoon. What are your qualifications to run for public office?
Who would that be directed to?
Both of them.
Okay.
For public office, just my almost 18 years of experience as the chief deputy over there, I've learned from Herb Brown. He's the current constable. He was the retired North Las Vegas assistant chief of police, United States Marshal for a few years, and then he became the constable. Anything from partnering with the police department, we have a good relationship with them because of him, and that's going to continue to be that way even after he retires. I've already met with several of the lieutenants and the police department, and they've agreed to allow me to go into the police department and actually show them what the constable does, because a lot of police officers don't know the land-lieutenant laws. They just don't know the civil end of it. So if you call them out there, they don't know what they should do, and they usually refer everybody to the constable. So we're going to start classes in their briefings, and we're going to explain the steps that a constable takes during an eviction, so that when they're out in the field, they know how to respond without always just telling people, call the constable for your information. So,
Thank you, Mr. Jeeves.
thanks.
And Mr. Clark?
I'm a Category 1 certified law enforcement officer here in the state. I was a police officer, like I said, with North Las Vegas. I've been with the constable's office now 4.5 years, so I have that criminal background, that side of it, but I also have the civil background. And the constable's office does deal with both. A lot of people just assume that all they deal with is civil, but you do deal with some criminal. Just the simple thing of issuing a citation is a criminal matter if it's a misdemeanor here in the state. So therefore, that is criminal. So some people are not sure exactly what the constables do, but warrants. I mean, if you come into contact with someone that has a felony warrant, you have to act. You have to arrest that person and take them into custody. So there are some criminal type aspects on that. So, but to go back to your question, I feel, with my experience, as a police officer and a deputy constable, I feel that's prepared me along with my life experiences. And it goes back to, I think from you're a little kid, honesty, integrity, you have to do the right thing. Because you can have all the qualifications in the world, but if you don't do the right thing, it doesn't matter.
Thank you. And Mr. Hensley?
This will be for both as well. What do you consider to be the number one issue affecting the constable's office?
Just over the past several years, we have a lot of situations with the elderly. A lot of times landlords, when they're evicting the elderly, they don't have any other resources. They don't have family in town. They don't have any place to go. But as our job requires us to do with the court order, we have to complete the evictions. But our office has set up a policy for the last several years that we will do everything in our, even if it means postponing the eviction for several days, to help these people find other sources through other agencies in the county. We just don't show up at a doorstep and say, we have a court order, we're evicting you, and have them stand out in the street. That's a policy that's been in place and that's continued to be in place. We just don't do that because lately we've been doing a lot more evicting of senior citizens, and we're just not going to, we just don't do that. We help them as best we can, calling other agencies, to postponing the eviction for several days until we can get something taken care of.
Thank you, Mr. Jeeves. Mr. Clark?
I would agree with Mr. Jeeves. That is a huge problem with the evictions as a whole. It's a tough job. Evictions are a very tough job. They can be very dangerous. A lot of people just think an eviction is you go in and you're kicking someone out. Number one, you gotta have a little compassion, I think, to do this job. Each case is a little different. You walk in, you see two little kids, and you're basically getting ready to boot them on the street. It's tough. It's very tough. Unfortunately, it's a job you have to do. But I would love to see some type of, like he was saying, support system for when you're booting people out of their homes. Some of these people, that's the last thing they have. The economy is, hopefully it's improving and it's going to recover more to protect some of those people. But I would love to, if we had the funding to do it, to set up some type of a temporary shelter system, a transition to help people out, especially, single mothers, children. That's the least thing, or the last thing I want to see is some children on the street. But unfortunately, with the constables, the way they work, we don't work off the general funds in a budget. So it's not like he's saying, we can't even just say, we're going to take 10% of our budget and do this. We don't have it. It's everything is self-generated. So that's why it's so important that whoever is elected out there, I hope it's me, but you have to do whatever you can to generate revenue, but give it back. You have to give some back. You can effectively pay everybody very well up there, take care of yourself, and still give back to the community. Because like I said, I have numerous programs that will not cost the taxpayers a penny. Not a penny.
Thank you.
And it's
Thank you very much. Mr. Yepko?
Thank you. I'd like 30 seconds to defer and not answer any questions, and I'll explain why. First of all, I've known Mr. Jeeves for 15, 18 years. Consider him a friend and consider him the most qualified person for the job. Secondly, Mr. Clark, take this with a grain of salt. I don't see how it's an honor and privilege to serve under the current Las Vegas Constable, John Bonaventura, given everything he's done. I do think leadership starts from the top down. In Vietnam, if you didn't get along with your crew, they fragged you, okay? So I'm not going to, make it personal. I'm just going to defer to Rhonda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Gibson?
Pretty good. How are you?
My question is,
Can you put the microphone closer to your mouth so we can hear you?
can you both give me one good reason why I should vote for you?
Number one, I feel I'm qualified. Just to touch on his comments, I totally agree with everything he said. Leadership does start from the top. If I give a bad example to my employees, they're going to follow my steps. If I do something that's wrong, they feel it's right, they can do that. So I totally agree with what you're saying. Leadership does start from the top. I do feel I'm qualified for the job. I think with the experience that I have had at the Las Vegas Constable's office, working with some state leadership, I do feel some more laws need to be changed. I think the constables as a whole, the reputation has gone down a lot on the constables here over the last few years, and I hate that. I do not want to see that. One of the things I want to build back up is the relationship with the community, leadership at the county level, but most importantly, the community. Community has to believe in us. Whether you're wearing a Las Vegas Metropolitan uniform, North Las Vegas, Henderson, we're all law enforcement officers. This is a law enforcement agency. So you have to have integrity. You have to do the right thing. I feel I'm the better candidate, no offense, just because of my experience with some of the other programs that we've done at the office, that I can pretty much step in and work with city leadership and county leadership to get some of these programs going and to save the city money, also to free up the police department with non-essential police work and keep the police officers on essential calls where they need to be.
Thank you. Mr. Jeeves?
Our office, all we do is work that was originally designed for constables to do. We don't tow vehicles, we don't do Fair Share Act. All those are the things that got the Las Vegas Constable's office in this hot water that they're in right now, and that's why they will not be there at the beginning of 2015. Being with the Constable's office as long as I have, I went to several constable meetings. We tried to talk to the Las Vegas Constable, trying to get him to, just because the statutes say you can do something, doesn't mean you have to do it. You have to, North Las Vegas Police, they do not want us towing cars. We could tow cars in North Las Vegas if we wanted to. We could do Fair Share Act, it's in the statute. The North Las Vegas Police Department does not want us to do that. We've talked to them several times. The money doesn't go to the city of North Las Vegas, it goes to the county. So, partnering with the police department is, I think, almost the number one thing, because when we do run into trouble, we need them to come and assist us, because when we are out there doing evictions, we don't go one deputy, one eviction. And if there's a family there, we're by ourselves. If we need assistance, we need to count on the North Las Vegas Police Department to back us up. And so our relationship with them has to be tremendous. We're not going to go against them when they tell us, please don't write tickets, please don't tow cars. We don't do that, even though we could.
Thank you. Ms. Steele, did you have a question?
Yes, hello gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today. Mr. Clark, I'm going to start with you. And Mr. Jeeves, don't think that you're off the hot seat. I have some issues with some of the things you said as well, but I'll start with Mr. Clark. It's my understanding that our government was put in place to protect our rights, and we are a nation of laws, not a nation of individuals dictating our lives to us. So to hear you say that if you heard the president, whatever president may be, pass an executive order, that you would enforce it, I really have issues with that. First of all, because we're a nation of laws, not a nation of dictators, and you're here to protect our rights. And our laws are passed by bodies of legislation, not individuals, for the purpose of protecting our rights. I would really like to hear you address that further. I have to assume that you understand this as a law enforcement officer, and so I have to assume that you made that statement just because it was, pressure or whatever. Executive orders, you have to understand, are not enforceable. They're not laws. They're executive orders, and each executive order states right on it that it is not an enforceable law. So please explain what you mean when you said that you would enforce an executive order passed by the president.
Okay, well, essentially, yeah, I was looking more towards law when you said that, but there's a lot of laws that are out there that sometimes, like a misdemeanor, you have the discretion on a misdemeanor. There's a few exceptions. Domestic violence, you have to arrest if you determine who the primary physical aggressor is. On laws though, if it's a gross misdemeanor or a felony, you don't have the discretion to say, I'm gonna let him go. So depending on the severity, I mean, what the case may be.
Well, let's go back to Mr. Pajunas' example.
Okay.
If Obama assigns, or whatever president assigns an executive order saying he's going to take everybody's guns, and he's going to charge you as a law enforcement officer to enact that. What's your stance?
Well, if it's law, then I have to.
Executive order is not a law.
Okay, all right, then at that point, going off of executive order, yes, you probably.
We have a constitution.
Correct.
Okay, so what do you stand on? Do you protect my rights, or do you enact a dictator's executive order?
Well, if it's an executive order, then you would have to protect the people, but if it's a law, then I would protect the law, what the law says.
Okay, thank you, that was my question.
Did you want to ask that of Mr. Jeeves as well?
No, that's all right, I'll let you slide.
Mr. Pajonas, you had a question?
So I've heard both of you guys talk about partnering with other law enforcement. That doesn't concern me at all. What are you guys going to do to partner with the community? That's my question. Both of you, please, 30 seconds.
That was what I was going to say.
We're not working together.
Never saw.
Go ahead, Mr.
Just to give you one example, once again, going back to the constables, a lot of the general public out there don't know who we are. I think that's one of the biggest things is we have to communicate, and we have to go out to the community and reach out to, like he alluded to, the elderly, because there are a lot in North Las Vegas, and try to help them, essentially. It's not just about kicking people out on the street, but we have to communicate. I think that's the number one thing. We have to communicate with the public, get out there and tell them who we are. You know, sometimes the first time they come in contact with a constable is on an eviction, and they're like, who are you? Are you law enforcement? Are you security? They don't even know who we are. So, you know, over the past few years, the only thing that people have related to the constables, unfortunately, is negative, you know, and it's, I would like to bring that back to a positive light and educate the public on what we do, number one, and try to help give back.
Thank you. Mr. Jeeves?
It falls under the same category. Again, being at this office for as long as I have, there's several policies that are in place to help the people in the community, not only with the elderly, but the people that don't have the money to pay for our services. If they're a property owner and the people aren't paying the rent, a lot of them are very short with funds. And if they come into our office and they find out they just paid the court $60 to pay for the eviction, then they got to find out they got to pay us $50 to actually serve the eviction or a notice or whatever it may be. We have a thing set up where if they can show us that they are short on funds or they're not working, or you know they haven't got paid their rent in 6 months, or they are short on money, we'll bypass. My boss takes the money out of his pocket and pays for the paperwork so that the deputies could get paid. We've said several, you don't have, if you choose not to charge these folks that don't have the money, just tell me, I'll do it for free too. He doesn't have to pay for it out of his pocket. But for the last several years, he's very stubborn and he won't do that. He'll pull the money right out of his pocket and put it in the register so the county gets the money or the deputies get paid. And it's just not for the elderly, but it's for anybody who come in and can show that they're short of funds or they just don't have the money because these people aren't paying their rent. They can't afford 2 mortgages where they live and their rental property. So we help them as best we can.
Thank you. Mr. Brockett?
Well, you both sides stuff the questions pretty much for me. So again, what are you guys going to do to partner with the community? What type of ideas do you have? You're talking about something that's currently going on right now. I want some original ideas. Because people see the constables, you guys are right. I mean, they came to my house once, it was an error from the property management company. I almost decked the guy.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to answer that question, and then we need to move on to another question.
Well, the constable's office, it's not, to me, it's not a type of office that, I mean, we have to do everything we can to work with the community to make them knowledgeable on us. You know, we go to these apartment complexes, the managers and the employees know who we are, but you're right, the tenants who live there, we show up, we have to identify themselves, we have to explain ourselves to them before we even tell them what we're there for. And, you know, if we do more to where we have these, kind of like a town hall meeting, where we can go to these different apartment complexes, have them hand out flyers or however we can do it to get people to come to the court. We could use the courtroom and have nightly training, and we could tell people who we are and what we do so they know who we are.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. Mr. Clerk?
Just a real quick one. One of the ideas I have, we discussed it actually, is a lot of people don't know how to evict someone. The first thing they want to do is call 911. Hey, I got this guy here, he won't leave, how do I get him out of here? This would be a great program to set up with the police department. I don't see why the police would not take our help. Essentially what I would love to do to essentially save them money is on a dispatch system. If somebody calls up and it's a simple landlord-tenant act, call us. Call us, we can go directly out there, save the PD, the non-essential call that they don't need to go out there, waste taking that officer for the potential of an essential call. That's just one example that I have that I think we can help.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Rowena, did you have another question? I'm sorry, Mr. Rowe.
This question is to both of you. I'm hearing a lot of, I'm trying to really listen to what you're saying, and I hear a lot of similarities, you know, between you, like to serve the public and in your jobs, but there's only one position. What is, starting with Mr. Jeeves, what is, you know each other, what
Just from
is
today.
your,
Yeah, just from
oh, just from today, okay. Then I think my question might be difficult to answer, but what is the one thing that we can leave with today or take away from conversation with you and your answers that makes you different than maybe as much as you know about Mr. Clark?
Well, he's definitely a nice guy from what I've been talking to him for a few minutes before we came up here. I don't know him personally. The only thing I can take away is the fact that over the
we can
past,
take away from.
is the fact that over the past 17, 18 years, the amount of evictions, small claims garnishment, the paperwork that the constable's office primarily, 99% of the work we do in North Las Vegas, I've done for the last 16 years. My understanding is that the majority of the work that Mr. Clark does in Las Vegas is writing tickets, fair share towing, stuff like that. He's not been in the field actually in the people's houses as many times as I have over the last 16 years, actually dealing with folks, evicting them, helping them with, you know, getting other forms of housing, other forms of transportation, calling the North Las Vegas out when kids are left home alone, dealing with, there's thousands and thousands of situations that have happened over 16 years, and because of I dealt with those, I feel that I would be better for the job.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
I agree. Nice guy. Don't have nothing against him. Yeah, unfortunately, there's only one position. I agree with them. No, I haven't done, I think he said 75,000 evictions. I haven't done that many, but I have been out on the street. I have done evictions, so I've been there. We've also done court-ordered seizures. Trust me, when you go to somebody's business and you pretty much are shutting their business down and you say, listen, you have to give us all your money. That's tough too. So there's multiple areas that people have to do in this office. But once again, just because everything has worked for the past 16 years doesn't mean you can't look at other avenues. And let's be frank, this city needs help. So if I can go in and work with the PD to save $1, that's one more dollar that is coming into the city that could essentially help. I don't have anything bad to say about the current administration out there. Herc's a great guy, so you know, don't anybody take that either. I think he's a great guy. But I just think that with some work with the community and the city, I think we can push it a little farther. Just because they're not doing some of those activities right now doesn't mean that they shouldn't be done.
Thank you. Rowena, did you have a question? Yes. Mr. Hensley, did you have a?
Oh, yes.
So, do any of the audience members have a question to ask, sir?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on
Use the
something.
microphone, please.
Sorry?
There's a
Oh,
cordless microphone right there.
thank you. Following up on an answer. It is on. Yeah, so following up on an answer that you gave earlier, Mr. Clark, and please, Mr. Jeeves, if you could answer as well. 60 years ago, there was a law that said that a black woman was not allowed to sit in the front of a bus. Would you have arrested her and upheld that law, or would you have upheld her right?
No, I would have not. I feel everybody is equal, and I feel everybody should have the opportunity the same. I don't think color, religion, any of those type of things should do that. Everybody is afforded the same opportunities. Yeah, there's been a lot of laws. Some are still on the books, unfortunately, in some states. Every law is not written perfectly. I deal with some right now on a daily basis that need to be reworked. That goes back to my comment. We have to get legislators on board to work together. If we have a bad law right now, we need to change it. Even if it's maybe one word that needs to be changed, we have to partner with them. But I'll allude back, is some of that is legislators have not worked with us as much as they should have. And I want to try to bridge that gap back and make it smaller so we can work together to change some of these laws and you know, get those nonsense laws off the books or rewrite them.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
That
Mr.
answers your
Jeeves?
question.
It's just like the laws that are in place now that allow us to tow cars and give tickets for speeding, and, you know, we could do all that. Just because it's a law doesn't mean it's right. I would lose my job before I would arrest that lady back in the day for being in the front of the bus. I would lose my job before I do that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, seeing none, we'll go ahead. I'm sorry, Karen?
Yeah, I have kind of a question comment.
In regards to the Rosa Parks question, I know law enforcement is a thankless job, and there's often a dilemma between what is common sense rights and what the law says. But as law enforcement officers, you are charged to uphold the law, even if you believe in your heart that it is a violation of somebody's rights. So please, if each of you could give me an example of how how you look at that situation and how you might approach it when do a civil example and a criminal example of how you think you might react in a situation like that where you know that somebody's rights are being violated, but the law is the law.
And keep your response to a minute and a half so make it succinct.
Yes. A civil one is the eviction. You know, I tell all my friends, be careful when you tell somebody, hey, you can come stay with me. Because once you let them stay there, their expectation that they're staying there. So you got to be careful. And you call the police department, you call Metro, whatever, it's civil. So they're not going to just say, get the heck out. So that is a real important one that I don't think the public knows enough about it. The eviction laws is essentially you think, you're okay, right, to let somebody come stay on your couch for a week or two and, you know, hey, I'm just helping them out. That's a big one. A lot of people are involved in that, and in a situation where law enforcement cannot evict them. So they have to go through the court process to essentially evict them. You know, and you would think it's my house, I can just kick them out, right? That's a big one there. Criminally, probably the biggest one that I've dealt with is domestic violence. Domestic violence is a bad one because you have to go off of what the statute says. If you can determine who the primary physical aggressor is, you must arrest. In a lot of cases, it's both. You know, and so you're trying to determine, did they provoke? And sometimes you cannot determine. As hard as you want to try, you've got 4 or 5 officers out there questioning. So, you know, sometimes those are very, very tough calls that you go out there to. So, you know, sometimes they're mutual and they both go to jail. But that would probably be the biggest one that I've personally experienced.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Jeeves?
I think mine would be kind of a combination of both. Recently, we've been having a lot of problems with squatters. There's actually no laws on the books right now that have squatters' rights. But through the police department and in our office, we've talked to our judges and tried to decipher a way for us to do that. We just had a situation last week where a landlord called up the North Las Vegas Police Department, said this lady was just in her house. She was getting ready to show it to a real estate agent. She goes over there, somebody's in her house. The back door was kicked in, the door jamb was all broken. The police were called out. They called us. We went out there and asked if they had a lease or, you know, what are you doing here? And she basically didn't say she had a lease. There was no legal right for her to be there, but the police would not do anything. It's a civil matter, and the only advice we could give is, yeah, there is no rights for squatters, and definitely all things led to her being a squatter, being there illegally, but you can't just go in there and make them leave. They could ask them to leave, and if they leave on their own, then they're okay, but if they make them, we fall in line for a lawsuit unless they come to our office and the court and file for an eviction. It's the only legal way to get somebody out, even though we know they broke into the house. What about that crime? Breaking and entering? They won't do anything because the law's too gray to cover areas like that. And like Mr. Clark said, the laws are too gray now that we need to tighten them up so that it's a black and white yes or no answer to most of the problems we have.
Okay, well, that leads me to another question then. You two in law enforcement and knowing these laws and knowing where the problems are, what can you or do you do outside of your office to help make the laws more, streamlined to protecting people's rights, both squatters and property owners and, whoever else? I mean, if you see a problem, do you do anything other than, ask your sergeant if you can do anything?
Thank you, Ms. Stillman. Mr. Jeeves, you want to start, and then Mr. Constable?
Yeah, we normally, up until the point where the Las Vegas Constable started getting in all the trouble and the bad publicity, we used to have monthly constable meetings, or quarterly, 4 times a year, that I attended for the last 10 years. Steve, who was here speaking on behalf of Earl Mitchell for the Henderson Constable, he actually, when we would sit down and talk, and we would put together packages at every legislation session would come up, and we would think of things, what can we do to fix these problems that we're having? Our problems might not be the same in Henderson, might not be the same in Boulder City, but we're all Clark County, so even though they're not having the same problems we are, Steve would put up packages, and he would go to Carson City every legislation session, we try to get the assembly people and everybody on board to try to change these things. Unfortunately, the constable's office isn't top priority, so a lot of the stuff gets gotten pushed aside. Just for example, just recently we tried to get the legislature to make it that the constable, before they even run for an elected position, has to be post-certified, minimum category 2, because that's what the statute requires. It got shot down. So you can have somebody like a politician win an office because he's a politician, not a law enforcement, not knowing anything about the constable's office, and look that's what happened downtown. But the one that did slip through was that even if you're elected, you have to be post-certified at minimum category 2 within 1 year of being elected. If you're not, my understanding is that you could be removed from office because you're not following this statute that did pass this last legislation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
It starts with me one by one. I have numerous people that walk up to me. I may be doing another call or something, and somebody comes up, hey, can I ask you a question? It starts off with communication. I think that's the most important thing with all levels of law enforcement. And like he alluded to, that goes back to communication to all the other law enforcement agencies as well, whether it be Metro or Henderson or whatever area you're in, but you have to communicate, whether that's one by one or you set up, town hall style meetings. But you have to communicate, yeah. If you don't reach out and start with one person by one person, then yeah, you're not going to make a difference. But I do believe it starts with one person. If you can get the first person, you can move on to the second person. But it's just educating people. But you have to communicate. If you don't communicate with people, nobody's going to learn anything.
And have you done that, do you think?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll go ahead and conclude this panel, and I think we have about 7 minutes before the next panel begins. So we'll have to